Bob Rosen is a New York Times best-selling author. He is a CEO advisor and psychologist. His newest book is Detach, Ditch Your Baggage to Live a More Fulfilled Life. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, excited
Appreciate
to,
it.
yeah, excited to have you on. Tell us about your personal lives, more about your work, and why you decided to write this book.
Well, I married to my husband of 42 years. I am a psychologist by training, a businessman by profession. Uh, I've written 8 books now. Most of my career has been spent on leadership and how CEOs of larger companies and smaller organizations build healthier businesses in all senses of the word. It started with a MacArthur Foundation grant early in my career, and it lasted for 40 some years. Uh, I became uh, concerned about the state of the world and how people were feeling inside themselves. And so I had a dream in 2010, and the dream was that I was attached to several attachments that were shackling me personally. My attachment to the future, my attachment to the past. And I wrote them down. And then I went up to the attic about 12 years later and I pulled it down and I started writing. So my concern right now is that there has been a 12 to 15 year decrease in global happiness around the world. People are more angry, they're more cynical, they're more mistrustful, they feel less connected and lonelier and and basically pretty resentful of what's going on. They're concerned about the direction of the world. And the way I interpret it is that people are just simply uncomfortable in their own skin. Now, some of this obviously is caused by politics and the partisanship right now in the country, but a lot of it has to do with what's inside our heads and how we think and how we feel about things. And so that's what I started to focus on is the baggage that holds people back, that drags us down and stirs up lots of anxiety and anger and sadness. And that's what the 10 attachments are in Detach. Just briefly, and then we can dive down into them. They are the attachment to stability, to the past, to the future, the attachment to control and to perfection, the attachment to success, to pleasure, the attachment to youth, the attachment to yourself, and the attachment to life. And these things hold us back. And now, fortunately, the mind has great capacity, as you know as well as anybody, to rewire and reprogram itself. And so the book really is a blend of Eastern and Western psychology and attempts to show through stories and through science how people are attached to unhealthy attachments and what they can do to let it go.
Well, I appreciate all that. Did you find that you were afflicted, suffering, favoring a certain kind of an attachment in your own life?
Myself? Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was clearly attached to the future and success from an early age. And what an attachment to the future is that we're preoccupied with what's to come and we obsess over what is missing in our lives. We're never satisfied with who we are or what we have. And by worrying about what's to come, we diminish our confidence and peace of mind. The attachment to success is very interesting because when our desire for success turns into a compulsive need for achievement, we've got a problem because we define success from the outside in rather than ourselves defining success. And so both of those were sort of, despite my successes in life, they were holding me back and creating angst for me. In fact, I had some years of burnout that and a number of surgeries, and happened that opiates were my drug of choice, just like shopping and social media and alcohol and drugs are for other people. And I got addicted for some time on Percocet and Vicodin, and I was attached to pleasure. And one of the problems with being attached to pleasure is that um, we are uncomfortable looking at the difficult parts of our lives, and know that, so therefore we throw stuff, social media, alcohol, drugs, at the problem to anesthetize the anxiety or angst that we feel inside ourselves. So these are very common attachments. And I find that for myself, every time I feel any kind of angst about something, I turn to the 10 attachments. And I find that there are solutions in those 10 attachments that frees me up and allows me to get rid of the angst and be much happier.
I don't doubt that for a second. So I appreciate that. So is there such a thing as a healthy attachment?
Well, all of the attachments that I described are healthy up to a point. Okay, we want some stability, although it never really exists. Uncertainty is reality, stability is really an illusion, but we want the feeling of stability. We want to, we like excellence. We want to feel pleasure. We want to feel youthful, but up to a point, and then it becomes an obsession. Then it becomes an attachment, and that's what we have to worry about. Um, so each one of these attachments has a solution to it. And we can talk about that as well, because it's one thing to define a problem, it's another thing to find the prescription or the antidote to get rid of it.
Yeah, yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I definitely want to do that. Um, and I guess going through each one would probably answer my question, but are there through lines throughout? Through
What
lines
do you
throughout?
mean? What do you
Um,
mean?
is there, well, that's maybe not as easy a question as I thought. Are there personality types that are more prone to attachments? So I could, as an individual, be attached to more things.
Yep. I find that when people read the book, they find three or four attachments that are particularly relevant to them. So let me give you an example. People who are aging oftentimes have an attachment to youth. And what happens is that we have idealized youth, and we have diminished our older citizens and also our older selves. And so many of us who are in midlife and aging or retired um, have what's known as internalized ageism. They denigrate themselves because their body is degrading, their mind isn't working, they just don't function the same way. And it has a huge effect on how long they live. Research has shown that people who carry internalized ageism live 7.5 years less than people who have positive attitudes about aging. Um, so, what do you do? Well, you have to become very conscious and love yourself for aging, to appreciate the wisdom and the independence that comes. We have a new intelligence when we pass 60. We're able to see more gray, less judgmental sometimes. And it's all about self-awareness. One of the things that we know from science is that um, in order to change, you have to feel the psychological pain, and it has to be greater than your resistance to change. So, getting in touch with your anxiety, your sadness, your worry, your grief is very, very important. And then you develop self-awareness about what's causing the problem. And underneath each of these attachments is fear. You're fearful of something. For example, if you're attached to success, you're generally fearful of failure. If you're attached to perfection, you're generally fearful of making a mistake or looking inadequate in front of people. Uh, and then that self-awareness becomes the catalyst for behavior change. And so that's the rationale. That's the reason why we need self-aware people. And that's becoming increasingly important for parents with their children. Certainly, managers and leaders, the most important skill that they need these days is self-awareness. I mean, I've interviewed hundreds of CEOs and advised many of them, and the ones who are self-aware at least have a chance to be a good leader. And if they don't, they're going to screw it up. It's just the way it works. Um, so I wrote this book to be a very practical guide for people to assess their attachments, their questions, and personal stories of other people as well in the book to help you get a sense of where you are attached.
Well, certainly that all makes sense that we have to become self-aware. We have to address the fear that is existing, and that's going to help us to kind of catalyze the change. So many questions, so many questions. Do you have you ever explored Buddhism and that whole deal?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, Buddhism teaches us a lot. It teaches us about the importance of impermanence and the fact that stability doesn't exist. The world is always changing. Uh, and it also teaches you about the basic concepts of detachment and how important that is. But Western psychology, the psychology that many of us practice in the United States, is all based on positive psychology, having goals, having dreams, having aspirations, reaching for higher standards and goals and awards. And when you combine those two, which Detach does, it gives you, I think, a much more powerful opportunity to change your behavior. Um, I mean, now obviously it's all about solution. So, I'll give you an example. Many people have an attachment to the past. Okay. We idealize or demonize our memories. We become immobilized by old emotional scars, um, relationships that didn't work, or business deals that went sour. And by not facing the truth and practicing forgiveness, we stay stuck in the past. And the brain has this capacity to stay stuck when it doesn't deal with unhealthy or difficult emotions. That's why getting in touch with the fear becomes very, very important. So, what do you do? Well, first off, is that you have to allow yourself to get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's hard for a lot of people. It doesn't feel good. But nobody said that the goal of life was to be happy all the time. Life is about cycles. We birth something, we grow, we have loss, and then it dies. And it keeps repeating itself. Relationships and nature and everything happens that way. The second thing is that we've got to learn to surrender and let go, and imagine what life would be like if you weren't shackled by that stuff from the past. Then it's very important to forgive. Not only to forgive. Now, the Buddha said it's important to forgive, but not forget, because you don't want to repeat old patterns where you put yourself, for example, in an abusive situation. But it's important that you forgive somebody. They did the best they could. And I find that that's really important for people who uh, are disappointed by how they were parented. I mean, you don't want to forget that that's where you came from because you got to work on it. But at the same time, you could say, my mother or my father did the best they could, given the tools and resources that they had. Now it's my job to live my own life. And I think a lot of people get stuck there. And then the last thing for the attachment to past is to rewrite your story. The story that you created as a young person is not the same story that is relevant when you're 60 or 40 years old. You have the tools to rewrite your story. And so that's just one example of one attachment that has a solution to it.
What percentage of human being you talked about how globally we are considerably less happy than we were 20 years ago.
You know,
Is it knowable? Does everybody have some kind of an unhealthy attachment, do you think?
well, that's a good question. Um, well, I think if you look at the aspiration for all of us, I wrote a book called Grounded. It was a New York Times bestseller. And I identified the six dimensions of well-being: our physical self, our emotional self, our intellectual self, our social self, our vocational self, and our spiritual self. And the more we aspire to well-being and health in those six dimensions, the healthier we are, the happier we are, and the higher performing we are. So we have a clear sense from science about what we need to stretch toward. The question is, how do we get there? And that's where the attachments get in. And we have to get unstuck from wherever we got hijacked in our past. And we all have them, some more than others.
Yeah, yeah, I like to think about limiting beliefs, and my field of work is personal finance. And so if we have a limiting belief about money, it's going to make us hard for us to become financially successful and have to go back and try to identify where these came from and the different attachments that we have, whatever it might be. So I think, yeah, there's probably some people out there that had perfect childhoods or were raised in very remote environments where there weren't a lot of other people around or media. So maybe they don't have it. But for the rest of us, Bob, we've got some work to do.
Yeah, aren't they lucky?
Aren't they lucky?
Uh,
Is
yeah, it's true.
I wrote down perspective and then agency. Um, and I really feel fortunate. I have a strong sense of personal agency where I do feel like I'm in charge of my life and in charge of my emotions and my thinking. It doesn't mean that it always goes the way that I want it to, but I feel like when I can identify it or what I do, that I can do something about it. Do you think do most people have a strong sense of agency? If not, can that be learned?
Well, it's a very, very important question. I do think that um, uh, loving yourself and gratitude are the two most important things to living a good life, a fulfilling life. Now, having said that, there are a lot of people who are attached to control. From early childhood, we're taught to shape our environment. We take charge and we learn how to maneuver our way and influence people to get what we want. But if you don't understand that much of life is uncontrollable and practice a serenity prayer, to accept the things I cannot change and the courage to change the things I can and the wisdom to know the difference. Um, so there's four types of control. There's certain people who have too much sense of mastery and and uh, and they control their environment or they try to control their environment. And then you have people who like to be controlled by other people. And then you have people who are passive aggressive, who want to control, but they can't be direct. And so they're indirect in their control. And then you have people who are the over pleasers. So the secret of getting out of this attachment to control is vulnerability. You have to feel vulnerable, but all four of those groups feel vulnerable in a different way. Okay. The controlling people feel vulnerable when they realize that what they are really motivated by is their own anxiety and their own desire for connection and power. And that gets in the way of their happiness. And you go down the list, and each of those four types expresses vulnerability differently. So the secret to getting out of the attachment to control is to get comfortable being vulnerable. I do agree with you that mastery is very important. Our confidence that we can take care of ourselves. And I think a lot of that comes from loving ourselves. And the last thing I would say here is that there are millions and millions of people who don't love themselves. It's a huge problem. And so I recommend to people that that's one of the first tasks is to figure out what is wonderful about you. And then to fall in love with that. um, because it gives you the confidence and peace of mind to step out into the world and deal with a lot of chaos. You know?
Yeah, oh, for sure. For sure. Well, so much good stuff here, and we could talk for hours, but that's the reason that you wrote a book about it, Bob. So thank you so much for coming on. Where can people learn more about you? And most importantly, for today, where can they get their copy of Detach?
Well, I have a website, it's bobrosen.com, and there are videos on there and little quizzes. We have two things that are really helpful to people. One is a pretty sophisticated assessment that's just going online in a couple weeks, and it gives you an assessment of your attachments as well as lots of recommendations on what to do. We also have a Detach book club guide for teams and for friends, where you can buy the book and meet and deal with an attachment periodically, each week or three at once, and have a conversation. Because I think conversations with people are very, very important. Um, and then the book is available everywhere. Amazon and every place where you would buy a book. I've noticed that they've got it out there, which is great. And if you read it, send me an email. It's bob@bobrosen.com. Give me your reaction. Tell me what you're attached to. I love to hear the stories.
I think that that's awesome. Well, if you enjoyed this as much as I did, show Bob your appreciation. Share today's show with a friend who also appreciates good ideas. Go to bobrosen.com and check out all things Bob Rosen. Take advantage of the videos he has on the site that give an overview of the 10 different attachments. Check out that assessment. Try to figure out where you might be hanging on a little too tightly. And I definitely agree having conversations about these things, and it's so important and part of the self-discovery process because this can be uncomfortable. And so having people around that can support you, I think is awesome. And then of course, pick up your copy of Detach. Ditch your baggage to live a more fulfilling life wherever you buy your books. And I'll link everything in the notes of the show. Thanks again, Bob.
My pleasure, George.
Until next time, remember, do your part by doing your best.